A millionaire came home late on Christmas. What he saw shocked him. Snow blanketed the quiet suburban street, soft lights flickering behind frosted windows. Ethan Walker parked his car in front of the dimly lit house, fingers still gripping the steering wheel long after the engine died. A slow breath escaped his chest. Another December night he was late for. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and gingerbread. A warm glow spilled from the living room, soft and golden. He opened his mouth to say, "Sorry I'm late," but the words froze on his lips. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. In the center of the softly lit room, Grace sat across from Emma, their hands moving in the air like a delicate dance. The Christmas tree shimmered behind them, lights reflecting in Emma's hair. His daughter, the little girl who hadn't laughed in months, was laughing now, silently, brightly. It broke something open inside him. Ethan stood motionless in the doorway, coat still damp from the snow. The world fell quiet. Grace's hands shaped meaning in the air, calm, fluent, tender, as if signing were her native tongue. Emma's tiny fingers followed, hesitant but full of life. He realized he had never seen his daughter look so alive. Grace hadn't noticed him yet. She smiled when Emma made a mistake, gently took her hand, corrected the angle with infinite patience. The golden light wrapped around them as if the whole house were breathing with their rhythm. Ethan's throat tightened. He, who always believed love was enough, finally understood. Love sometimes needed to be learned. He took a cautious step forward. The wooden floor creaked. Both turned toward him. Emma's eyes lit up when she saw her father. Grace straightened quickly, pulling off her cleaning gloves. "I'm sorry, Mr. Walker. We were just—" Ethan shook his head softly. You know ASL?" Grace nodded, voice gentle but firm. "I learned it as a kid. My sister's deaf." The simple sentence pierced through the years of silence. Ethan glanced at his daughter, the trust in her eyes, the warmth directed toward this woman. Gratitude and guilt tangled inside him. He knelt to Emma's level. The girl signed a few quick gestures. Grace translated with a smile. "She said she's happy you came home." Ethan copied the movement clumsily, his hand trembling. "Dad's happy too." Emma laughed soundlessly, shoulders shaking in joy. For the first time in years, the house seemed to breathe. The lights reflected in Emma's eyes. Warmth flickered across Ethan's face. Grace stood quietly nearby, her soft smile glowing like a candle. Ethan looked around. The garlands, the scent of cinnamon, the shimmering tree. Everything was familiar, yet suddenly beautiful. Not because it was Christmas, but because there was a laughter without sound inside these walls. He whispered, his voice tight, "Thank you, Grace." She shook her head, voice barely above a whisper. "I just talked to her." But Ethan knew she had done much more than that. She had given his daughter back her voice, the one hidden behind silence for too long. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, warmth gathered. And in that quiet, golden night, Ethan understood. The only thing that had truly been lit wasn't the Christmas tree. It was his faith in miracles. The house had fallen back into its familiar quiet after Grace took Emma upstairs. Only the golden light from the Christmas tree spilled across the wooden floor, shimmering like a fragment of memory left behind. Ethan stood by the doorway without turning on any lamps. His shadow stretched long over the carpet, blending with the blinking lights. A man lost inside his own home. He had never known silence could feel this heavy. It was the same room, the same leather chair where he used to read blueprints at night, the same crooked family photo on the wall, yet everything seemed changed. Something fragile had awakened, something so delicate he was afraid even breathing too hard might make it vanish. On the sofa, Grace's yellow cleaning gloves lay forgotten. Such a trivial thing, yet his eyes lingered there. He could still see her fingers moving through the air, graceful, gentle, weaving light. She spoke with her hands, his daughter with her eyes, and they understood each other perfectly. And he, the father, stood outside their world in silence. Ethan closed his eyes. The image stayed vivid. Emma tilting her head, her lips moving with each sign, smiling with her whole face. That soundless laugh echoed inside him, louder than any Christmas melody. He wondered how he had lived all these years without realizing his daughter had been growing in a world he'd never learned to understand. He exhaled, long and tired. "She doesn't need more gifts, Ethan," he told himself, the words heavy with guilt. "She just needs someone who can talk to her, and that someone isn't you." He walked slowly to the window. Outside, snow kept falling, each flake landing softly on the porch, glowing under the warm light. He raised a hand to the glass, his breath fogging the reflection. He looked older, not by years, but by truth. For the first time, he truly saw himself. A good father on paper, a stranger to the child who still called him Dad. He remembered the way Emma looked at Grace, trusting, unafraid, her eyes bright like candlelight. The little girl wasn't scared of silence anymore because someone finally understood her. Ethan saw it clearly now. A deaf child didn't need pity. She just needed to be heard, to be looked at, to be understood in her own language. "Grace?" He whispered her name in his mind, a thank you that never made it out loud. She had come into their lives by accident, yet somehow had touched the part of them he thought no one could reach. Outside, the wind stirred the Christmas lights. Reflections danced across the window and flickered in his eyes. Ethan stood still, palm pressed against the cold glass, lips moving silently. "I'll learn. I'll learn to understand her. It's late, but I'll learn." The promise made no sound, yet in that house that had been silent for far too long, it rang like a small, fragile bell. That Christmas night, Ethan discovered the most precious thing in his life, and it made no sound at all. The next morning, pale sunlight slipped through the curtains, laying a thin veil of light across the living room. Ethan had woken earlier than usual. The coffee on the table still steamed, untouched. His mind kept replaying the night before. Grace's hands, Emma's smile, and that strange silence he didn't want to break. He heard quiet footsteps in the kitchen. Grace was cleaning, dressed in her dark blue uniform, hair tied neatly back. She hummed under her breath, not quite a song, just the rhythm of breath and movement. "Good morning," Ethan said, his voice low and a little hoarse from a sleepless night. Grace turned, surprised. "Good morning, Mr. Walker. I thought you'd still be asleep." "No, I woke up early," he replied, forcing a small smile. "Coffee helps, I guess." She returned a polite smile, but avoided his eyes, still a bit uneasy after what had happened the night before. Ethan stepped closer, his tone gentle. "About last night. Thank you." Grace hesitated. "I was just talking to her." "No," he shook his head softly. "You made her laugh. I don't remember the last time I saw that." Silence hung for a moment. The light caught Grace's face, softening her features. "I didn't mean to overstep," she said quietly. "I just wanted Emma to feel less alone." "You didn't overstep," Ethan said, his voice lower now, unexpectedly honest. "You did something I couldn't." Grace smiled faintly, but didn't answer. She turned back to the sink, letting the running water fill the quiet. Ethan stood still, watching her hands move gracefully beneath the stream, feeling that something small but real was shifting between them. A soft sound interrupted them. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, hair messy, eyes still sleepy. When she saw her father, she smiled and signed good morning. Ethan hesitated, trying to recall what he'd seen the night before. He lifted his hand, slightly off, but close enough. Emma giggled and ran into his arms. From behind, Grace watched, a gentle light flickering in her eyes, the quiet joy of someone witnessing something right finally happen. As Emma sat at the table, Ethan leaned toward Grace, his voice just above a whisper. "I want to learn. The sign language. I want to talk to my daughter." Grace froze for a heartbeat, then looked up at him. "You mean it?" "I do." She paused, then nodded slowly. "All right, I can teach you a few basics." "Now?" Ethan asked, almost breathless. Grace let out a soft laugh, her first genuine one. "Now? Let's start with the sign for father." She stepped closer, lifting his hand, guiding each movement. When her fingers brushed his skin, Ethan heard his heartbeat loud and clear, louder than any sound in the house. Emma watched, laughing every time he got it wrong. The room filled with silent laughter, and within that silence, something was beginning, something too gentle to name. From that morning on, something inside the little suburban house had shifted, softly, yet unmistakably, like warmth spreading through the air. Mornings no longer began with haste or heavy silence. The clink of spoons, Emma's laughter, and Grace's gentle voice, teaching sign language, blended into a wordless melody. Ethan truly started learning. At first he was clumsy, his hands stiff, gestures wrong, but every mistake made Emma giggle, and Grace would smile, lift his hand, and adjust it patiently. Sometimes they stood so close that he could hear her breath, smell the faint scent of soap on her wrist. Each time his heartbeat stumbled, but he forced himself to keep his gaze steady. "That's not quite right," Grace murmured, her voice barely more than a whisper. "You need to curve your fingers a bit, like this." She placed his hand correctly. Her skin was warm, his hand trembled slightly, not from the cold. He looked at her eyes, seeing a light of patience he hadn't witnessed in anyone for years. "Good," she smiled, "just like that." Ethan smiled back, knowing deep down he was learning more than a language. He was learning how to reach someone. Afternoons grew gentler. Sometimes they cooked together. Grace taught Emma to slice vegetables, while Ethan, hopelessly unskilled, tried to flip a pan without spilling everything. "Dad, wrong!" Emma signed, laughing so hard she almost fell off the stool. "You seem better at breaking the kitchen than cooking," Grace teased, and he laughed, really laughed. The sound filled the house, mixing with the smell of garlic and butter, breathing life into walls that had long been silent. One evening, Emma sat drawing at the dining table. She was focused, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth, glancing up now and then as her father and Grace cleared the dishes. When she finished, she ran over proudly and lifted the page. 3 small figures, a man, a woman, and a little girl around a table, with a tiny Christmas tree in the middle. Above it, in slanted handwriting, "Dinner together." Ethan held the paper for a long time. The drawing was childish, uneven, but it made his chest tighten, as if someone had just placed in his hands something precious he thought he'd lost forever. He looked at Grace. She stood quietly, her eyes soft, understanding without a single word. "She's good," Grace said softly. "Yes," Ethan replied, his voice rough. "You know, it's been a long time since I saw myself in any picture." Grace didn't answer. She smiled instead, a small smile touched by warmth and sadness, like someone who knew she had stepped into a place she might not belong, yet couldn't walk away from. After that, they didn't speak of it again, but the atmosphere inside the house changed. Grace became part of its rhythm, steady, caring, quietly essential. Emma clung to her, learning faster than ever. Ethan was slower but steady, never skipping a lesson. One night, after Emma had gone to bed, Ethan stepped out to the porch, watching snow fall on the yard. Inside, Grace was wiping the dining table. He called softly, "Grace." She looked up, light glinting in her eyes. "Thank you," he said, "for all the small things you do here. Maybe they're the only reason this house still feels alive." Grace froze for a second. Her lips trembled, then curved into a faint smile. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Walker." "No," Ethan replied quietly. "You're doing more than that." She said nothing, lowering her gaze as she wiped the last drop of water from the table. Outside, the snow thickened, coating the golden porch lights. Inside, warmth spread through the room. Ethan looked at her one last time before turning off the light, realizing that some people don't come into your life to change everything. They come to remind you what warmth feels like. The winter days that followed passed in a soft calm. Ethan's house had slowly become a place with a heartbeat. Laughter, food, the warmth of people living inside it. But within that fragile peace, the first shadow began to stir. One afternoon, while snow blanketed the porch outside, the phone rang in the kitchen. Grace was slicing apples for Emma. She glanced at the screen, and in that single moment, her face changed, her eyes sharpened, her hand froze midair. She turned off the phone so quickly that Emma looked up in surprise. "You're not answering?" the little girl signed. Grace forced a smile. "It's nothing, sweetheart. Wrong number." But even her smile couldn't hide the tension in her voice. From the living room, Ethan noticed. He had grown used to Grace's movements. Quiet, steady, gentle. Now she looked like someone trying hard not to tremble. That night, after Emma was asleep, Ethan walked into the kitchen and found Grace washing dishes. Her reflection shimmered under the warm light, shoulders slightly hunched, hands trembling under the water. "Who was calling?" Ethan asked, his voice soft, carrying no accusation, only concern. Grace looked up, fear flickering in her eyes before she masked it. "It's not important, just something old." "Something old?" "There are things that should stay in the past, Mr. Walker." Her voice fell, almost like a plea. Ethan stood still for a moment, then said quietly, "If it's something that frightens you, or touches Emma, I need to know." Grace set the plate down and took a slow breath. "You don't have to worry. I didn't bring any trouble here." "I'm not worried for me," Ethan replied, his gaze steady. "I'm worried for you and for her." Her hands tightened on the edge of the sink. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Sometimes a bit of kindness is enough to make someone lose their way. I'm afraid I'll mistake gratitude for affection." Ethan stepped closer, his voice low, a tender challenge. "Is that fear, or is that you?" The air froze. The ticking of the wall clock grew louder. Grace lifted her eyes, long, quiet, conflicted. In them lived pain, gratitude, and something that looked like longing, held tightly in restraint. Ethan met her gaze, saying nothing, afraid that any word would shatter the fragile balance between them. A drop of water slid from Grace's hand into the sink, breaking the stillness. She turned away, forcing a small smile. "Don't push me, Ethan. I can't." He was about to reply when soft footsteps echoed from the hallway. Emma appeared, hair tousled, clutching her teddy bear, signing sleepily. "What are you two doing?" The air changed instantly. Grace knelt, gathering Emma in her arms, her smile returning, gentle, natural, safe. "We're just talking, sweetheart," she signed softly. "Go back to bed." Emma nodded, hugging her neck before climbing back upstairs. When her small figure disappeared, silence returned. Ethan sighed. "I don't want to push you, but if that past hurts you, you don't have to carry it alone." Grace didn't turn around. Her shoulders trembled slightly. "Some things," she said, voice barely steady, "we carry to remind ourselves never to forget." Ethan didn't move. He knew that if he took one more step, the fragile distance between them would vanish. And neither of them was ready for that. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft flakes melting against the window pane. Inside, the kitchen remained warm, yet a thin thread of cold wove silently between them. They stood there in quiet, under the muted glow of the kitchen light, reflected in each other's eyes. Two people trying to learn how to trust again, yet still afraid of what might happen if they did. Since that night, something unspoken had changed in the little house. Everything looked the same. Grace still woke early to make breakfast, Ethan still left for work and came home with Emma, and evenings were spent practicing sign language. Yet between them lingered a silence that wasn't empty, a quiet charged with things neither dared to name. One morning, Ethan passed by the kitchen and saw Grace laughing with Emma. The soft morning light caught her hair, turning a few strands to gold. She didn't see him watching, and for a fleeting moment he felt he was witnessing something fragile, a piece of peace he feared would vanish if he reached for it. Day by day, he realized Grace had become the rhythm of the house. Not loud, not intrusive, just quietly necessary. She remembered how Emma liked her toast, how Ethan took his coffee, and his habit of sitting by the window whenever it snowed. All those small details wove an invisible thread that made him feel, for the first time in years, not alone. That afternoon, Emma insisted they all draw together. She placed 3 sheets of paper on the table, signing, "You go first, Dad." Ethan grinned, grabbing a pencil and sketching awkward lines. Grace leaned over, tilted her head, and laughed. "That's supposed to be a tree? Looks more like a broom." "That's artistic interpretation," he teased. Emma burst into laughter, falling against Grace's shoulder. Her laughter filled the room, soft and round as sunlight. Ethan looked at them, the two of them side by side, and knew this was the image he'd been missing all along, a real family. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Ethan stayed in the living room, practicing the signs Grace had taught him. She walked in, a towel in her hand. "Still practicing?" "I want to remember everything. I don't want Emma waiting forever to be understood." Grace's eyes softened. "You've changed a lot." "Maybe because of you?" The words slipped out before he could stop them. Grace froze, needing a moment to process what she'd heard. The dim light reflected in her eyes, making them glisten. "Ethan," she breathed. "I don't want to scare you," he said, stepping closer. "I just can't pretend I don't feel anything." She took a half step back, bumping lightly into the table. The air thickened. "You shouldn't," she whispered. "I can't let this go too far." "How far is too far?" he asked, voice calm, not demanding, just honest enough to make her look away. Silence stretched. Grace closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. "If I lose control, if I let this feeling take over, what happens when the past catches up? I'm afraid. I'll hurt you. Or Emma." Ethan's expression softened. "You couldn't hurt us, Grace. You're the best thing that's happened to this house." She looked up, eyes bright with tears. "You say that because you pity me." "No," he said firmly, "because I know what it feels like to fall in love again. And this time, I want to get it right." Time seemed to stop. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the lamp above, the rhythm of their breathing mingling in the still air. Grace turned away, her hand tightening around the towel. "Ethan, don't." "I'm not asking for anything. I'm just telling the truth." She stood still for a long time before whispering, her voice almost lost to the snow outside. "Then please, don't make me believe." Ethan watched her, unable to move, caught between wanting to reach out and fearing he'd break her if he did. The house was so quiet he could hear the clock ticking each second away. Upstairs, Emma shifted in her sleep, a faint smile touching her lips. Perhaps, in her dreams, she still saw the 3 of them at the dinner table beneath the warm yellow light, a family the 2 adults below were still too afraid to call by name. That night, after their unfinished conversation, Grace went to her room late. Ethan stayed on the sofa, the dim light casting quiet shadows across his face. Neither of them said another word, yet both knew the distance between them had never been thinner. Delicate as thread, one wrong move could break it. The next morning, snow still blanketed the yard. Ethan woke early, made coffee, and waited for Grace to appear like she always did. But the moment she stepped through the door, he noticed something was wrong. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. She didn't smile as usual, just set her bag on the table and lowered her gaze, avoiding his eyes. "Grace," he said softly, "is something wrong?" She shook her head. "No, just didn't sleep well." "You didn't sleep, or something happened?" That question made her freeze. A beat of silence passed before she murmured, "It's nothing. Really?" But her hands clenched tight around her bag. Ethan stepped closer, gently placing a hand on her arm. The touch made her flinch. "Grace," he said quietly, "don't lie to me." She lifted her eyes, torn and trembling. Then, with a breath that seemed to drain her, she whispered, "He's out of prison." Ethan's voice dropped. "Who?" "My ex-husband," she said, her voice cracking. "The one who—" She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Her fingers dug into her palms. "He called last night, said he knows where I am. I thought I'd run far enough, but I guess not." Ethan felt his throat tighten. "Has he come here?" "Not yet, but I'm scared. Scared that if he does, you and Emma will be in danger. I have to leave, Ethan?" "No." The word came out instantly. "You're not going anywhere." "You don't understand. He doesn't stop. If I stay, I'll bring you trouble." Ethan stepped closer, his hand resting firmly on her shoulder. She froze at the touch, fragile, trembling, but no longer alone. "You're safe here," he said, slow and steady. "I won't let anyone hurt you. No one." Grace looked at him, eyes torn between belief and fear. "Ethan, you don't know what he's capable of." "I don't need to," he replied. "I just know you're not alone anymore." The words broke something inside her. Her whole body shook as tears slipped down her face. "I'm so tired, Ethan," she sobbed. "I just want peace, just once in my life." Ethan said nothing, only pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. The warmth of his chest slowly calmed the tremor in her shoulders. A small sound interrupted them, footsteps on the stairs. Emma stood there, wide-eyed, worry written all over her face. She couldn't hear the words, but she understood. Grace wiped her tears and smiled weakly. Emma ran forward, threw her arms around her, and signed carefully, "Don't cry. You have us here." That clumsy little sign made Grace cry again. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was release. Ethan knelt, placing his hand gently on both of them. Morning light streamed through the window, wrapping the three of them in quiet warmth. No words, only trust. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, a new kind of faith flickered to life. Small, trembling, but real. And in that moment, Grace knew. For the first time in years, she was truly safe. 3 days after that tearful morning, snow still blanketed the ground, but something in the Walker house had changed. Ethan had replaced all the locks, checked every window, and though Grace was still afraid, she no longer hid in silence. That evening, the doorbell rang, making her flinch. Ethan opened the door to find only a mailman holding an envelope and a small parcel. Nothing more. The street outside was empty, except for snow and warm lamplight. When he turned back, Grace was gripping the kitchen counter. "It's all right," he said calmly. "Just the mail." She nodded, though her eyes betrayed her worry. Ethan stepped closer, resting his hand gently on her shoulder. "He won't get near you, Grace. I spoke with Officer Ramirez this morning. There's a report on file and a patrol car circling the block tonight." Grace exhaled, a small, shaky smile touching her lips. You always find a way to make people believe. Because I believe first, he said, his smile like a quiet flame. The next night was Christmas Eve. Emma rushed through the house, wrapping gifts in silver paper, tying clumsy red ribbons. Grace helped her with the bows, warmth rising in her chest at the sight of the child's joy. By 7, the snow outside shimmered under the lights. The house was filled with the scent of cookies, apple cider, and the soft crackle of the fireplace. Emma ran over, holding a tiny white-wrapped box. She signed slowly. "For you. You need a star of your own." Grace opened it and found a small silver necklace with a star pendant. The glow from the tree caught the metal, scattering light like pieces of the sky. Her lips trembled, tears spilling as she bent to hug the girl. "Thank you, sweetheart. It's the most beautiful star I've ever had." Ethan watched from across the room, a mix of tenderness and ache twisting inside him. He stepped closer, saying softly, "She's right, Emma. You deserve a star, Grace." When Emma ran off to fetch dessert, only the two of them remained by the tree. Grace's fingers brushed the pendant, eyes glistening. Ethan's voice came low, rough with honesty. "Grace, since you came, my daughter started smiling again, and He paused, gaze drifting to the window where snow melted against the glass. "I started living again." Grace looked up, her eyes luminous. "Ethan," she whispered, "I can't promise anything. I don't know if the past will ever stop following me. I'm just scared." "Then don't promise," he said, stepping closer, voice soft as breath. "Just one day at a time. Tomorrow and the next. That's enough." Her tears fell quietly as she moved into his arms. His embrace was gentle, warm, like snow melting on skin, fragile yet achingly real. Outside, Christmas lights burned bright. Inside, two souls found each other among the ruins of their fears, while upstairs a little girl slept, holding half-wrapped gifts. The star-shaped pendant shimmered on Grace's neck, a silent promise that even if every light in the world went out, there would still be one small star to lead her home. Winter passed, leaving behind wet streets and soft spring sunlight. The months that followed were calm, as if life itself had decided to repay them with peace after all the storms. Ethan, Grace, and Emma now had a new ritual. Every weekend, they went to the community center to teach ASL to children with hearing loss. Grace had the idea, and Ethan made it happen. Soon, their small class was filled with laughter. Watching Ethan sign in front of the whiteboard, his hands fluid, his expressions natural, as if ASL had always been his language, Grace often found herself smiling. He had learned for his daughter, but now he spoke the language so well the children adored him. Emma ran around helping her friends, her joy lighting up the room. Sometimes Grace stood back, quietly watching them, her heart still full. Peace, she thought, might just feel like this. No more fear, no more shadows, only warmth and hands that spoke where words once failed. When class ended, the children rushed to hug them. A tiny girl signed slowly, "Thank you for teaching us to speak with light." Grace smiled through tears, replying with her hands, "You are the light." Ethan stood nearby, eyes soft, watching her. He knew how far she'd come, from fear to trust to love. And somehow he'd been allowed to walk beside her through it all. A year had passed since their first Christmas together. The house was now filled with photos, laughter, dinners, lessons, smiles. Grace laughed more often, and when she did, every empty space in the house seemed full again. For their one-year anniversary, Emma had a secret plan. She spent the week creating a video, choosing photos, adding music, writing captions. When the evening came, she pulled them both to the couch, grinning, and pressed play. Images flickered across the screen, Grace teaching Ethan to bake, Ethan helping Emma sign, the three of them laughing under the Christmas tree. The light from the screen danced across their faces, and when the final frame appeared, there was only one word, spelled out in sign language: family. Grace smiled, turning toward Ethan, but he was no longer beside her. He was kneeling down, eyes shining, hands moving gently in the air. "Will you marry me?" The room went completely still, only the sound of hearts beating. Grace lifted her hand to her lips, tears spilling freely. She signed back, trembling but sure. "Yes." Emma jumped up, clapping, her face glowing. She signed carefully, one word at a time. "Family, forever." Ethan laughed softly and pulled them both close. Grace buried her face against his chest, laughter and tears blending together. Outside, snow began to fall, late, thin, a gentle blessing from an old winter. Inside that small house, three people held one another close. Around Grace's neck, the star-shaped pendant glimmered under the light. No words were needed. They all knew. The pain was gone, washed away. What remained was a beginning, where hands weren't just for signing, but for holding, keeping, and loving, one day at a time. Winter returned, soft, quiet, and kind. That morning, snow blanketed the little garden behind their house, painting the world in white. Beneath garlands of pine and golden lights, Grace stood in a simple dress, her eyes trembling between nervousness and joy. Across from her, Ethan waited in a gray suit, looking both warm and impossibly sincere. It wasn't a grand wedding, just a small ceremony with close friends, their ASL students, and laughter echoing softly among the falling snow. Emma ran around in her white dress, radiant as the light itself. When the officiant smiled and nodded for them to begin, Grace drew a breath. She looked at Ethan, her hands slightly shaking, but her gaze unwavering. Her voice rose, quiet but clear, interwoven with gentle signs that moved like air. "I promise never to forget the way you taught me to love, with patience, with trust, and with the hand that always finds mine when I'm afraid." Each word, each gesture shimmered in the cold air, and every person watching fell silent, afraid to disturb the moment. Below the arch, a young woman wiped her tears. Grace's younger sister, deaf since birth, standing beside Emma. She smiled brightly, her hands moving gracefully to sign that her sister looked beautiful. Grace saw her, laughed through tears, and signed back, "I'm happy now." Then it was Ethan's turn. He took Grace's hands and held them tight. "I don't have much to promise," he said softly, then signed each word as he spoke, his eyes steady on hers. Love doesn't always make a sound. Sometimes it's the silence that lets us hear the truest things. A hush fell over the crowd. Snow drifted gently around them, wrapping the garden in white. Grace smiled, tears glistening as she leaned closer. When Ethan kissed her, it was soft, warm, like snow melting in the heart. Beside them, Emma held Grace's sister's hand, both clapping and signing, "Be happy." As the afternoon faded, guests departed, leaving just the three of them standing in the snow-covered garden. Ethan held Grace's hand. Grace held Emma's. Together they walked forward through the snow, laughter soundless yet alive. Around Grace's neck, the star-shaped pendant shimmered, reflecting the fading light. Small, gentle, but steadfast, like the love they'd built together. There was no music, no fireworks, only breath, snow, and the quiet certainty that happiness doesn't have to be grand. It only needs peace and the courage to love, one day at a time.